Welcome everyone to Dr. John Bedker's Leadership Podcast, the podcast focused on leadership. The episode will begin shortly. Thank you so much for tuning in. Enjoy the podcast.
Welcome everyone. Thank you so much for tuning in to the Dr. John Bedker Leadership Podcast. I'm your host, John Bedker. Well, today is September the 18th, 2024, and as the New York Times said it here just moments ago, the moment that we've all been waiting for is finally here. The Federal Reserve cut its key interest rate by 0.5 percentage point this afternoon. That puts the rate at about 4.9%, and there's a possibility it'll go lower. In fact, I would say likely. All right, so we're going to talk about what the Federal Reserve did. We're going to talk about it from a leadership point of view because this was absolutely a moment of leadership. So I'll make some comments about that as we go along, but let's start with a little definition of terms, make sure everybody's on the same page of what we're talking about and what we're not talking about. So here we go. Let's talk about this idea of what the Federal Reserve does. The Federal Reserve sets monetary policy. What is that? All right, here we go. Monetary policy. Basically, it's the adjusting of the supply of money. And what it does is it's seeking to achieve some combination of control of inflation and output stabilization. That might be a lot of words, maybe too much. A little more here. Monetary policy, this is what the Federal Reserve does, refers to the actions of central banks. Now, in the United States, we call that the Federal Reserve. Countries all around the world, democracies all around the world, have independent central banks. It's a very, very good reason why countries and democracies in particular do that, why they maintain monetary policy as an independent function, cut right to the chase to reduce the politicization of the currency in that particular country. We don't want politics getting in the way of trying to really do the real mandates of monetary policy, which are full employment and a control of inflation. That's really what monetary policy is all about. That's what democracies around the world do with their independent central banks. And today it is a key observation of what was done by the Federal Reserve in the United States. Well, what's the alternative? The alternative is what we call fiscal policy. Now, fiscal policy is quite different. It refers to the sort of tax and spend, the policies that governments do. They pass a budget, although in the United States, of course, we're now less than 2 weeks from the deadline, the expiration of our current budget, and we still do not have funding to continue. So there's this large and looming discussion about will there be a government shutdown because the government has not approved the fiscal spending for the United States after the end of this month. Well, that's in stark contradiction to what we're going to talk about today, which is a leadership moment. We see, unfortunately, in the Congress of the United States, the Speaker of the House bringing forth a bill today which has a realization of going nowhere. So not a leadership moment again for the Congress, certainly not the Speaker, Mike Johnson. But on the other hand, we have today in this podcast an opportunity to talk about leadership in a positive and affirmative way, and that is with the chairman of the Federal Reserve, Jay Powell. Okay, so monetary policy, really trying to control inflation and trying to seek full employment. Fiscal policy, on the other hand, is about taxation and spending, that which the Congress does. Separate, not linked, one obviously very political, Congress, the other not political, and that would be the Federal Reserve, or around the world, central banks. So today, in fact, in the question and answer session after the Fed meeting, Chairman Powell was asked about politics and politicization. And he made it quite clear that no, absolutely not. Not interested, not on our radar, not a factor in our decisions. Now, of course, there will be people that say that is not true. There'll be misinformation and disinformation because that's the polarity of our politics in the United States. But I would like to emphasize as a leadership matter that is absolutely not the case, nor has it been for a long, long time. Okay, monetary, fiscal policy, we understand it. The Fed today, in charge of monetary policy, lowered the Fed interest rate 50 basis points, basically 1/2 of 1%, 50 basis points. Okay, so what does that tell us from a leadership point of view, just the beginning? All right, here we go. We know this as leaders, but let me emphasize it. You never have a second chance to make a first impression. A core leadership axiom. You never have a second chance to make a first impression. So, a lot of discussion before the meeting about, 1, would there be a reduction in rates? 2, would it be 25 basis points, a quarter of a point? Would it be 50 basis points? Ooh, twice as much, 0.5 percentage. Well, a lot of debate and discussion about that. But what did Chairman Powell do? He said, no, absolutely. I want to be crystal clear that the time is right and that rate cuts are the appropriate action and they are sustainable in order to complete our mandate, to fulfill our mandate of full employment and control of inflation. So he didn't shy away. He was affirmative, he was assertive, and he was clear. The vote was not unanimous. There was one dissenting vote that said it should be 25 basis points, but everyone else agreed with the chairman, 50 basis points. And that's what resulted. So, first leadership axiom, you never have a second chance to make a first impression. And in fact, he did make an incredible impression by not doing 25 basis points, but instead doing 50, which is frankly the beginning of an ongoing series of rate cuts, we believe. Why? Because of the mandate. What did Chairman Powell, and let me just rephrase that a little bit for the purpose of our podcast, Leader Powell, what did he do? Well, a year ago, he saw high inflation in the United States and very low unemployment, historic low unemployment. So there was no question that rising rates were necessary, one, to get inflation under control by raising interest rates, and secondly, not to fear the full employment charge that he has, because we were at historic lows of unemployment. Okay, so what happened as rates went up and up? Inflation continued. Well, what happened in the end? What has happened now? Inflation has markedly dropped. The leadership of the Federal Reserve in the United States proved to be spot on by getting a good handle on inflation. It is not at the target rate. that 2% number that's often mentioned. But it is headed there, and it is headed there continuously for the last year. So no question that the mandate of getting inflation under control and stabilized is happening. What about the unemployment? Did it do so at the cost or expense of workers? Chairman Powell today in his comments was crystal clear about that full employment mandate, making it really apparent that that is absolutely an important charge for the Federal Reserve. So now unemployment is just over 4%, in the low 4%. And he believes that this economy, which is strong, robust, still growing, but inflation is coming down and headed towards the target, that working is still, and wage increases are still continuing, job openings are still continuing, that this was the time to act as a leader, to exercise this next two leadership axioms, judgment and decision-making. How? Based upon data, based upon facts, not upon a calendar, certainly not about politics or an upcoming election. He made that crystal clear. But do it because it is the right thing to do. And here we have the very reason for this podcast, leaders being called to do the right thing. And so today, Chairman Powell and the Board of Governors made it clear this was the right time to recalibrate. That's the word that he used today, to recalibrate monetary policy in the United States. A real act of leadership. What did he do? He lowered the rate 50 basis points. So now the discussion is, what next? What will happen next? What's the impact on this? Well, I'm going to talk about that more as we go along, but I'll use one quick example from an article this afternoon in the New York Times, talking about what will happen next to all kinds of things. And the one thing that people are particularly present about, certainly in the United States, is housing and the cost of housing. The cost of buying, the cost of renting. Housing overall has been a very, very difficult proposition. So here's what the New York Times said today. Mortgage rates have fallen to their lowest level since February of 2023. But more palatable rates aren't going to solve the affordability problem. Housing prices remain high in large part because there simply aren't enough homes to meet the demand. Rates on 30-year fixed mortgages, that's the interest rates, don't move in tandem with the Fed's benchmark, but instead generally track with the yield on 10-year Treasury bonds, which are influenced by a variety of factors, including expectations about inflation, the Fed's actions, and how investors react. And my quick comment here, of course, is that inflation is absolutely coming down and heading further down, and it has not affected wages, earnings, or employment, only marginally. The average rate, New York Times article continues, on 30-year fixed-rate mortgages was 6.2% as of Thursday. That's down from 6.35% just last week and 7.18% this time last year. Rates are also more than a percentage point lower than their most recent peak of 7.22% in early May. So here, not directly linked, but we already see mortgage rates responding to the action of Fed Chairman Powell's leadership. And after his decision today to lower rates with the prospect of lowering rates further going forward, this could be an absolute plus for mortgages and for people seeking to buy a home. Okay, so just a quick point of, so what happens next? Okay, let's talk about the Fed now. Back to the monetary policy and the leadership of the Fed. What next for them? Well, one thing that they have done to ensure that they avoid the politics in the upcoming election is move the next meeting off 1 week so that it will not occur until after the election. So I think that's prudent. Again, from a leadership point of view, I think that's smart. It is, in fact, doing the right thing. It is being proactive rather than having to be reactive from the press and the pundits and the commentators who may challenge the decision had he not. So I'd like that leadership competency piece of being proactive rather than reactive. Here's the thing also I want to mention again about leadership is that for leadership to be effective, it not can or could or should, but for leadership to be effective, it must be consistent. Well, here is Chairman Powell. Scheduled meeting conflicts with the election. No, not even going there. Not going to do that. Move it a week forward. We're not involved in politics. Not going to do that game. Consistently doing the right thing. So I think that's a huge, again, clear, just vivid example of how Chairman Jay Powell, as a leader, really is bringing exemplary leadership to his chairmanship of the Federal Reserve. Okay, so going forward, will the next rate cuts be 25 basis points, 50 basis points, or more? He made clear in the question and answer session after the announcement that the data will guide that. Show me what's happening to employment. Show me what's happening to inflation. Peel that onion, so to speak, in many different ways to really get sense and meaning making to inform our decision going forward. So he said that calmly, he said it clearly, and it just really inspires you from a leadership point of view, knowing that he will be guided by data. He will be guided by facts. As leaders, I've talked about this over and over again, and I'm going to mention it again now. You need to be able to trust that person in charge, have a belief in them. And how do you do that? The leadership axiom, trust is based upon trustworthy behavior. And listening today to Chairman Powell, that just shone brightly. He will be guided by facts. He will be guided by the data, knowing full well that a lot of this data is trailing, right? It's not to the moment, to the day. It might be trailing data, but it's consistently trailing. So from that, he will make his best judgment about the path forward, as will his fellow members of the Federal Open Market Committee, that group that ultimately will vote on, make a determination of what to do with monetary policy. In this example, interest rates going forward. So, is it likely that the rates will go down? Yes, highly likely. None of us can predict the future, but highly likely. How much? We don't know. Again, that data will inform that decision. But if it's another 50 or 75 basis points by the end of the calendar year, and next year, if this continues until we reach this stabilization, right? Stabilization, important concept in monetary policy, between the mandate of full employment, we don't want people losing their jobs and being out of work, and inflation. We don't want an inflationary environment. We want inflation to be down. Again, that target rate somewhere in the 2% range. So it's a bit of a delicate balance about the two of those, and how you control that money supply by raising rates or not lowering rates, or saying, no, we need to lower rates in order to stabilize the mandates of full employment and inflation stabilization. All right, so big day, important day, a really interesting and fun day. I know it's nerdy and wonky, but I'll tell you, folks, the impact on each and every one of us, in every one of your families, your homes, your businesses, your life, is so dependent upon how this economy works. And again, on the one hand, we see in fiscal policy, the Congress of the United States headed for another possible shutdown, which I truly hope they won't, and I have a hard time believing that they will. But today we have nothing, no bill, no passage, no way to pay our bills going forward. Yikes, not a leadership moment. But on the other hand, today we had this wonderful experience, this great leadership example of Chairman Jay Powell, not just saying it's time to change monetary policy, but do it in a way with clarity, with certainty, by going 50 basis points, not 25, and by saying that the path forward will be guided by doing the right thing. Okay, everyone, thank you so much. Really a fun day. I hope you've enjoyed this. It's really actually quite significant. I know it's a little wonky, but oh my goodness, I really enjoyed listening today, and I hope you did as well. Take care, and we will talk soon.
Thank you for tuning in to Dr. John Bedker's Leadership Podcast. We hope you enjoyed this episode. Please tell your friends, and of course, please follow our podcast and subscribe. Thank you again for tuning in.